So my name is Wade Sander and I am the winemaker and director of Brunia Wines. Once there was an African love song, December African Rain. I think it's very fitting. For us and what we're trying to do out in Sondagskloof, it's very much an African love song. It's a love for the environment, it's a love for nature, it's a love for the wine, and I think winemaking is very much a labor of love. So I think it is definitely very fitting. We are making our own African love song out in Sondagskloof. Yeah. So for me, I was initially drawn to winemaking from a consumer point of view. So I'm actually from Johannesburg, or my family's from Johannesburg. So I didn't grow up around vineyards and the winelands, but grew up more around bottled wine, bottled products. So my parents had a healthy interest in wine, and my father had a modest wine collection, and for some reason I was always very sort of taken with it, and the idea of aging wines and having wines, and just that sort of part of it. And I also had a healthy interest in agriculture as well. And for me, as I got older, into high school, that sort of made sense to me, and it was something that I then decided to pursue further. So I studied at Elsenburg, just outside of Stellenbosch, this was quite an adjustment from Johannesburg. I always say that I learned Afrikaans in about 2 weeks in the courses. Very much a change of scenery. I think the biggest surprise about winemaking for me was that, for me it wasn't so much of a surprise. I really enjoyed it, and I think it wasn't so much not what I expected, it was just finding out what it actually involved. I always enjoyed being outdoors. I think what I wasn't exposed to early on was maybe the actual hands-on winemaking side of things, and it wasn't so much of a surprise, but definitely a learning curve, but something that I really enjoyed. Yeah, so it was a bit of a journey. So I was working elsewhere for the better part of 10 years. So I started in Stellenbosch and I moved around a bit. I worked in Amanus for a while, and then I spent quite a long time in the Swartland, whilst I also did some vintages overseas. And I think Cold Mountain is a family project, and my elder brother, he's also involved in agriculture, but he took a little bit of a different journey into agriculture himself. And I think it got to a point where my father saw that we were both very much inclined towards agriculture, and it became a bit of I think what started as a bit of a joke became a bit more of a serious discussion about the potential of investing in a piece of land and starting a bit of a family project. And that idea grew, and it eventually culminated in the Cold Mountain project. So we work in an appellation called Sondagskloof, and Sondagskloof is situated on the south coast. So we are further south than Hermanus, sort of in the mountains between Stanford and Napier. So Sondagskloof is a very new appellation. It's actually a very small appellation, and there's currently only 2 farms making wine or growing grapes in that region. So very much a unique sort of setting for wine grapes. It's similar to other regions that are very close by the Walker Bay, in that we have the Atlantic Ocean nearby, moderating our temperatures, but we also, as I mentioned, situated in the mountains just outside, which makes for a very interesting growing area. I think my experience in general from where I've worked, so I had the privilege and I guess opportunity to work with winemakers that very much had a feel for the land, and it was always about the land and not so much about the winemaking. So I think my philosophy is also very much influenced by that. So wine starts in the vineyard. So for us it was always about where the vineyards are, where the grapes are coming from, and the wine that sort of dictated the winemaking and our end products. Wine is a product of place. Brunia is a silver Brunia. It's a fynbos species. It's this flower over here. Brunia is a very rare flower that grows in the Cape Floral Kingdom, and on our farm we are actually blessed with quite a bit of it. So for us, again, it very much speaks of the place, and because of that we decided to name the brand Brunia. All our vineyards are surrounded by fynbos. Most of our farm is actually fynbos, so we've almost sort of found areas within the fynbos to start our agriculture in. A lot of the farm is still dedicated towards conservation, so we like to think that it just sort of brings harmony into what we're doing in terms of the agriculture. It feels a lot more of a sort of natural feel than sort of most conventional vineyards or farms, and we like to think that it does have an influence on both the quality and sort of characteristics of our wine. When we took over the farm, there was vineyards planted, and it was a very much a conventional agriculture sort of setup. And for us, being non-generational farmers, sustainability was very key to what we wanted to do. So we started transitioning the farm to organics. It was a very difficult process. I think, without getting too technical, there's two types of sort of transitioning, and that's establishing organic and there's conversion to organic. And conversion to organic is very difficult sort of process. The vines are obviously used to operating in a certain way, so there was those challenges in that we had an ideal or an idea of what we wanted to do, but there was also the challenges sort of practically that we needed to sort of work out. And yeah, it was very much a journey, but something that we still believe quite. There was definitely a stage of sort of acclimatization or getting used to the new status quo. But yeah, we've reached a medium now that the vines are producing well and are producing good quality grapes, and we're also farming in a way that we are taking care of the land. Wine is something that I really enjoy. It's a passion. It's not really a job for me. It's something that it's not difficult to wake up and do in the morning. So I think it just suited sort of my needs and my personality, and the environment is good. It's a healthy one. So, and I think the community, in terms of wine, it's a very welcoming and sort of, I think community is the word. You know, it's a very close-knit sort of industry. It's quite a small industry, and especially down in the South Coast, which is sort of a new area. There's a lot of younger winemakers or winemakers of my generation that we network and share ideas, and it's a very stimulating environment to be in. Yeah, so the Pinot Noir comes from a single vineyard site off the farm. It's actually the youngest farm on the property currently, so the vines are now around 14 years old. Most of the wines that we make are single vineyards, so each wine is a story of a single block and a single site. So yeah, so the soil is sandstone and quartz, quartz-based soils, which lends the wines to a very sort of textured, chiseled sort of character and structure, and the wines from Sondagskloof are generally quite elegant. When we stumbled across Sondagskloof, we really felt that it was a place with a lot of potential. And I think one of the things that excited us about it is that it was sort of undiscovered. There wasn't too many wines coming from the region. So it was sort of a niche that we could sort of get stuck into and sort of really tell the story of. So the difference between Sondagskloof and Heelmel en Aarde is that we are both part of the Greater Walker Bay, but I think the main difference is that the soil types are very different. So generally in the Heelmel en Aarde you have a lot more clay-based soils, and I think generally the wines can be a little bit heavier and a little bit more structured, whereas in Sondagskloof we are predominantly sandstone and quartz-based, and the wines have a slightly lighter texture, a little bit more ethereal, and definitely a fresher acidity and a bit more tension and elegance in the wines as well. So this wine is aged in French oak barrels for 10 months. Pinot Noir is a lighter red style. It's a wine that needs aging but doesn't need too long, and it's a wine that very much about subtleties and nuances. It's not a wine about power. It's a more wine that woos you than sort of shocks you with its power. So we tend to age the wine in 10 months in a mixture of older and new and second fill barrels, just to sort of frame the wine. We don't want to overpower it with the oak, but just to give it a little bit more complexity and to balance out the wine. So generally in our Pinots you should be picking up a bit of sour cherry. We don't really make, because we are such a cool climate area, the wines tend to be much lower alcohol. It's very light red fruit, strawberries, sour cherries, and then I think sort of what's a trademark of Sondagskloof is that we always have a sort of light herbal note to the wines without the wines being green. So we always like to say that they smell and taste of the fynbos, you know, and it's very much sort of that slight herbal, almost essential oil sort of note to the wines. It just sort of balances out the fruit. Definitely, I think Sondagskloof as an appellation creates very ageable wines. We are very cool climate and we have a very long hang time. So the wines generally have very high acids, low pHs, which means that they are really built for aging, and they sort of are tightly wound and need and sort of unwind slowly over time. You may not think as much because the alcohols are not high and it's maybe not sort of blockbuster wines, but they are really tightly wound. They're almost like a very tightly coiled spring. You know, and there's elegance in the wine, but there is real power and sort of underlying sort of persistence to the wine as well. It's a very different environment. Swartland is obviously quite warm and quite hot, but I think what the Swartland did teach me was that you need to very much be aware of what's happening in the vineyards. A day or two in the Swartland, things can look very different. So you need to be very much in touch and aware of what's happening in the vineyards. And I also feel like the Swartland is unforgiving. You know, you need to be on top of things and present at all times. And I think that's very much a similar way that I approach the wines in the Sondagskloof as well. Red wine suits winter. We make a lot of white grapes as well, but I think there's nothing more comforting in winter than a nice glass of red wine with a warm plate of food. It just warms the soul. So it's all about the growing conditions. So if I can also just sort of compare with the Swartland. So Syrah in the Swartland is a cultivar that we worked with quite a bit. We always like to say that when we were working in the Swartland, all of the Syrah was done picking by Valentine's Day. We only start picking Syrah in Sondagskloof in March. So we really have a whole month extra hang time in the vineyards. But we are still often picking at a lower alcohol level. So it allows the wines to really have this slow, gradual sort of ripening and maturing process on the vine. And it really just allows for wines that are really well proportioned. They are properly ripe and phenolic ripe, but still have a lovely freshness and elegance about to them, and really just makes wines of finesse and real sort of ageability and texture. It's very small sort of fine tuning. So I've always made the wines in the same way. It's very cliched nowadays, but we have a very hands-off approach or minimal intervention approach. But what I sort of more like to talk about is that we're really trying to bottle the vineyard. My job in the cellar is to sort of get the grapes into the bottle in the way that they best sort of express this with the vineyard site. So we haven't really changed in terms of how we make the wines, but there's been those small fine tunings of what more does the wine need just to sort of bring it out and show a bit more of the place. So we have sort of played with percentages of whole bunch, we've played with picking dates, you know, just adjusting ripeness a few days this way or a week that way to see what flavor profiles we'll get. And I think also another big sort of factor where we are is that we get a lot of rain in the growing season. So we always have to be on the lookout for that. So we do a lot of guyot in where we are. So we don't necessarily have cordon trellised vines. We work with new wood quite often. And it just seems to suit the area a bit better. The vines are a little bit more fertile because we don't really have very fertile soils. Our soils are quite shallow. So working with a guyot or new wood sort of structure with the vines tends to be more suitable in that area. With the Syrah, definitely deeper, darker, more brooding. There's lovely spice notes in this wine. I think we always get a little bit of black olive sort of flavor profile as well. A little bit of sort of maybe a cured meat, and definitely those spice tones, very much a pepper sort of expression on the wines as well. And then I think again, just sort of lingering in that background is that sort of herbal fynbos note that seems to be a trademark through all of the wines as well. It's definitely wines for collecting. You know, because we have really bright, fresh acidities, sometimes the wines are really not too approachable in their youth, and it's also how we've learned to treat the wines on release. So what we do like to do is to bottle age the wines for a year or so just before release, to let them sort of come together and show their best selves. Definitely, I think for a collector, this is wines that are very unique. Within the South African context, not even sort of globally, you're not really going to have many wines that taste of Sondagskloof or have the same sort of expression. So it's a very sort of unique experience, and I think very nice sort of wine to share with people, because it's something that's quite unique and not many people can replicate. We have a slightly more classic design on our label. We really wanted to sort of announce and talk about our region and our place. Obviously we have the Brunia, and we have a little small sort of details about the Brunia laevis plant and the fynbos that it grows in. We have Sondagskloof, that's across the bottle, loud and proud. It's all about the site. And then just to draw it in, we've got a picture of some of the farm buildings that really just sort of, again, brings it back to the farm and the location, and talks a bit about place. Yeah, so our aspirations for the project, I think, is to become a generational brand. We've, I think, done a lot of the hard work in terms of investing in the property and undertaking the farming aspect of the winemaking as well. I think when you invest in land, it's something that you're not really thinking about your generation for. It's something that we're thinking about future generations, and I think that's very much where the family is looking. It's something that we're hoping can create a bit of a legacy and a bit of a story moving forward in terms of the brand. And I think then for the wines, it's just about sort of that fine tuning. We are definitely looking at the vineyards, replanting some, seeing what works best to put us in the best position to create quality wines moving forward, and to really put Sondagskloof on the map. So for us, it's really about looking forward.